It started with curiosity, a simple human curiosity that has led many to their doom. In a small, forgotten town in the northern hills, 5 friends gathered one chilly October evening, unaware that what they were about to do would change their lives forever. The town itself seemed to be waiting, cloaked in mist and silence, as if it knew what was coming. The group consisted of James, the self-appointed leader always searching for thrills; Emily, his cautious yet curious childhood friend; Mark, the quiet observer; Sarah, fearless and impulsive; and Alex, the newcomer, eager to prove himself. They were ordinary teenagers, reckless in their sense of invincibility, convinced that the old stories they had heard were nothing more than superstition. It began in James's attic, a space long abandoned, filled with dust, old furniture, and the shadows of forgotten memories. The moon cast faint, eerie light through a cracked window, turning the ordinary into the sinister. They had drawn a circle on the floor using chalk, carefully placing black candles at each corner. In the center lay a small, simple wooden board. Nothing about it seemed dangerous, at least not yet. James started chanting the words he had copied from an obscure online forum, phrases he barely understood but thought sounded powerful. At first, the room remained silent, the air still, their breaths shallow and nervous. Emily laughed nervously. "This is ridiculous. It's just words and candles." But then the air changed. A chill crawled up their spines, whispering along their skin like icy fingers. The shadows in the corners began to shift, elongating unnaturally. At first, they thought it was imagination, but then they heard it, a faint whisper, a whisper that grew into a voice. It spoke their names one by one, mocking, echoing through the attic. Mark tried to leave, moving toward the door, but it slammed shut with a force that shook the walls. Panic spread like wildfire. Sarah screamed, grabbing Alex's arm as the temperature plummeted. Frost began forming on the floor, spreading outward from the circle like black ice. Emily's laughter turned to sobs. What is happening?" she asked, her voice trembling. James, however, seemed entranced, continuing to chant as if possessed. Something had taken hold of him, and the rest of them could only watch in horror. The shadows began to move on their own, stretching and twisting into shapes that resembled human figures, but not human at all. Faces appeared in the darkness, screaming silently, eyes wide with terror, mouths contorted in agony. And then the voice spoke again, deep and guttural, coming not from the room but from inside their heads. "Why have you called me?" The friends froze. Emily stumbled backward, hitting a trunk and falling to the floor. Mark grabbed James, trying to pull him away from the chanting. "Stop it! You have to stop!" But James could not. His eyes had a strange, distant glow, and his voice carried a rhythm that no human should be able to hold. Hours passed, or maybe it was minutes. They could no longer tell. Time itself seemed to stretch and bend within the attic. The shadows twisted into grotesque forms, whispering secrets of the past, fears that had never been spoken aloud. Each friend saw visions of their worst memories and darkest desires. Alex, who had wanted to prove himself, now realized his mistake. He lunged at the board, attempting to destroy it, but invisible hands threw him across the room. Sarah screamed, clutching her head, as the whispers became a chorus of screams, filling every corner, every crevice of the attic. Emily suddenly found herself standing in the center of the circle, unable to move. Her eyes glowed faintly, reflecting a presence that was not hers. The entity had found a host. It was choosing her. Mark managed to pull James back, breaking the trance for a fleeting moment. "We have to destroy it," he yelled. The plan was simple. Destroy the board, snuff the candles, erase the chalk circle. But reality had changed. The walls stretched endlessly, the floor became liquid darkness, and every step forward felt like wading through thick, invisible molasses. The entity spoke again, its voice now louder, resonating inside their skulls. "You invited me. Now you belong to me." Desperation took over. James, realizing what they had unleashed, grabbed the wooden board with all his strength and smashed it against the floor. The candles exploded, throwing shards of wax like glass across the room. The chalk circle cracked and crumbled, and for a moment, the shadows faltered, the temperature returned to normal, and the air felt breathable again. But relief was fleeting. Emily collapsed, screaming as the entity left her body, but not without leaving a mark. A black sigil burned into her wrist, pulsing faintly, almost like a heartbeat. No doctor could explain it, no ritual could remove it. It was a permanent scar, a reminder of the horror they had invoked. The friends fled the attic, but even in the foggy streets outside, they were not free. Shadows lurked at the edges of their vision, appearing in mirrors, reflecting surfaces, always just out of reach. At night, whispers followed them, calling their names, reminding them that the entity had not forgotten. James moved to another town, hoping distance would break the connection, but nightmares persisted. Sarah could sleep no more than an hour at a time. Haunted by visions of the entity dragging her into darkness, Mark became paranoid, convinced the shadows were watching, waiting. And Alex vanished. No one knows where he went, but the others whisper that sometimes, in the dead of night, his voice joins the whispers, calling new names, repeating the ritual that started it all. Weeks turned into months. Their lives became a series of small horrors, objects moving by themselves, shadows stretching into impossible shapes, whispers echoing in empty rooms. Emily's Mark pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, syncing with the terror she felt each night. It was not just a memory, it was a tether, a constant connection to the entity they had summoned. The town began to notice strange occurrences too. Animals behaved oddly, disappearing without a trace. Residents reported faint screams in the night, voices that seemed to come from the woods. Some claimed that on foggy nights they saw figures moving in impossible ways, bending reality itself. But no one could prove anything. Those who investigated too deeply often left town, terrified, or vanished entirely. One night, James received a message on his phone. No name, no number, just a single sentence. "It's not over." He looked around his apartment. The shadows seemed darker than before, stretching along the walls, pooling in corners. The air was colder than any autumn night he had ever experienced. He realized with horror that the entity had followed him, patient and eternal. Sarah, desperate, tried to perform a cleansing ritual she had found online. It failed. Every chant, every symbol, every prayer only seemed to anger the entity more. The shadows grew, forming shapes that resembled faces she knew, smiling at her as if mocking her attempts. Mark tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was psychological, maybe it was fear manifesting. But then the whispers began in the middle of his day, in broad daylight. They were not inside his mind. They were outside, around him, in the wind, in the rustle of leaves, in the hum of the city. They called his name. They laughed at him, and he realized that no amount of reason could save him. Emily, now permanently marked, discovered that the sigil pulsed in time with a presence she could feel, always near, always watching. At night, it whispered secrets she never wanted to know, showing visions of places she had never been, events that had not yet occurred. It was feeding on her fear, growing stronger with every heartbeat. Alex's disappearance remained a mystery. Some claimed they saw him in the woods near the old town, chanting alone, his eyes reflecting the same unnatural glow Emily had experienced. Others whispered that he had become a vessel for the entity, continuing the cycle, inviting others into the darkness, repeating the ritual. The attic, the origin of their nightmare, remained. Empty, silent, but alive. Locals who dared to enter spoke of cold spots, of shadows moving on their own, of whispers that called their names. The place waits, patient, biding its time for the next curious soul foolish enough to summon what should never have been called. And the truth is clear. Evil does not forgive ignorance. It waits, it watches, it remembers. Once invited, it never leaves. It hides in the corner of a room, in a reflection, in the whisper of the wind. And if you ever find yourself tempted to explore the unknown, remember this story, because some doors, once opened, can never be closed. The 5 friends survived, barely, but the entity continues. Patient, eternal, hungry, and perhaps, somewhere in the shadows, it smiles knowing the cycle will begin again. So, if you hear a whisper at night, if shadows move where they shouldn't, if the air suddenly chills around you, maybe, just maybe, someone called it. And now, it's waiting for you.